I'll start with saying this. The typical classroom scenario or the traditional model basically, I'm probably oversimplifying this, but I think you'll capture the main concept that I'm trying to get across here. Traditionally, people tend to think of schools as a situation where you have 20 some odd kids in a classroom and the teacher's up front explains a few things to the kids, introduces some information. They do a little bit of practicing and they tell the kids, do some homework, study it on your own, and come back. And they teach the content throughout the year on a very strict schedule. And every so often, there's a test that's issued, and that test gets entered for a grade in the grade book. And at the end of the grading period, they get a grade. And at the end of 4 grading periods, they average those out, and you get an annual grade. Okay? That's a system you know. Now, that's not necessarily a bad system. It's just a system that doesn't reach everybody. I would say, and based on the data that we have from the first 4 years of operation, is that works for maybe 60 to 70% of the kids. The 60 to 70% of students that would have been good anyway. So what we're going to do next year is, first of all, if I could sum it up in one phrase, it would be, the student is the class. And that's not my saying. I think that's a Licky saying, right? That is Licky.
Fischler.
Fischler, I'm sorry. Yeah. Abraham Fischler being the founder of Nova Southeastern University. He lives here in South Florida. He's also the former chair of the Broward County School Board. And think of what that means. The student is the class. When a teacher tests the class, everybody tests on the same day, and 70 or 75% of the kids pass the test reasonably, and I call that the proximity level, the teacher moves on to the next thing. And if a student didn't get that information, or if the student is in that area of the 20 or 30% of kids that didn't understand or didn't quite pass the test, they have to move on anyway. Now, for a long time, I've thought about how do we address this problem, because I really don't think that this is the best way to teach. But because we're a public charter school and we have to follow certain state requirements, we've come up with a hybrid to address that. I'll tell you one problem in particular that in high school is a very serious problem. When you follow the student progression plan, which we do, it means that anytime you pass a class, you cannot take that course again. And you automatically move to the next level. So let's take mathematics for an example. If you get a D in Algebra 1 for your final grade in 9th grade, you move on to geometry. A D is hardly a good grade for anybody to go anywhere in, right? And so here comes 10th grade and that student is still struggling, and by the 3rd year, they may be lost altogether or perhaps missing a credit. Now, this is not everybody. We realize that many of our students are good mathematicians, but this same situation might be happening in other areas. It could be language arts, it could be science. And the problem with this is that there's no real teaching for understanding going on. There's no real teaching for mastery. Students, a large amount of students, are just moving through. And so what we say with that system is that because we have to cover all of the material, because we have this checklist of benchmarks and objectives that the state says we have to do, we move kids on. And the time is constant. Okay? Everything is on a time schedule. First grading period, we're going to do this. Second grading period, we're going to do that. Third grading period, we're going to do this list of stuff. And then the last grading period. What happens with that is that for the students who can handle that, they do fine. But the ones that can't, the learning becomes variable. Some kids are going to have A's. Some kids are going to have B's. Some have D's. Some have C's. Some have F. And the ones that are at the bottom of that, it's really difficult for them over time as the material gets more and more difficult. And again, if you're a school like us that's trying to get everybody into these AP courses and trigonometry and calculus and these courses that we know are going to make them competitive for college acceptance, as the material gets more and more difficult when they get older, unless we teach the skills for them to become better learners, they're not going to get better. Their GPAs are actually going to come down. They have to keep up with that pace. So now what we're going to do is we're going to implement a time variable model, which means that students are going to be able to work at their own pace. It doesn't mean that they're going to have an unlimited amount of time. What it means is that they're going to be able to manipulate the time with the cooperation of the teacher to serve their needs. Okay? One good example I could give you, if you can think of this picture, picture yourself in a situation where you're trying to go from one city to another in your car. Okay? and you're told that you have to go 50 miles an hour to get there. And you can never slow down, and you can never speed up. So when you reach a sharp curve, you have to take that curve at 50 miles an hour. And when you're on a straightaway where you could make up for some time and you have no curves, you can't go any faster than 50 miles an hour. Now picture that in a school setting. When students are put in a strict timeline, okay, those that can go faster tend not to be able to do so because the teacher has to wait for certain kids in the class to catch up, because a good teacher is going to try to keep as many kids on board as possible. That's expected. And we call that the proximity, the herd. Okay? Now, if a student is a struggling student in that class, it doesn't help that student because the class is going to go too fast for him or her no matter what. So the only ones that are going to really benefit from this are the ones in the middle. And that's not a really thorough approach. So because time is constant and the learning is variable, we have mixed results. As we move from year to year and the material gets harder, the kids who have always been good are doing well, and the ones that have always been bad are doing poorly. So how do we fix this? We have to change it to a situation where the same way that the class moves forward when there is overall success, 70%, 75%, that's fine. But now the student is the class. And the only way you can do that is if each student is working individually, one by one. So if a student is very, very capable in mathematics, they can just move right on ahead. If a student is struggling, they can slow down to their pace. Now, your teachers have been here for a week, and I've been researching this model for 2 years with a lot of emphasis being placed on it over the last 2 to 3 months. In a nutshell, here's how your grading is going to work this year. If you're a student who is working during the first grading period, for example, let's use math. Math is a good example, but this is going to apply to all of your classes. There is a certain amount of information that has to be covered in the first grading period. Okay, we know that. If you're a very capable student and you're working at your own pace, you're going to be able to exceed those. You're going to move on as quickly as you want. And the teachers over time are now being trained to be able to manage that. Okay? Teachers won't be, they can be on occasion, but by and large, they won't be lecturing at the front of the class and then just giving you a test at the end of it all. That's not the way that this is going to work. What's going to happen is that before you can go to the next thing, you have to master the thing that you're on. So if you're a little bit slower in math, the class does not move ahead because you are the class. The student is the class. And so while we can have some students that have mastered maybe 15 major objectives in the first grading period, there might be another student who's maybe has only mastered 10, and that's okay. They will both have an A at that point in the class. Because in this model, learning is the constant, and what we're going to vary is time. But of course, to do that, we have to do it on a one-by-one basis. So eventually computers will be a big part of this and technology, but it need not only be that way. It can be throughout many different types of monitoring.
The question becomes, how do you become a visible change agent in this kind of environment? I left a full professorship with tenure from Berkeley, and I came here in '65, and I've been here ever since. And it wasn't until '92 that I had the university at the point where I could say, I'm done. Okay? That's how long it took. But I don't have another 15 years to start another one of these projects. So I talk to the young people who are 25 years younger than I am, and maybe even more, and say to them, if you want to do this, then you have to do it. Not through talking about it, you have to do it.
Yeah.
You have to bring the group together. You know, I've been in the game now a long time, from '52. So I'm saying to you, you gotta kind of bring together a group, and it's going to take years of commitment and argument and debate, but you got to demonstrate that what you're producing produces a product that we need.